Basically, you attempt to shoot it. We immediately retrain if it's like a quick fix. We immediately retrain, fix the deficiency, and you get a second attempt. If you still fail on that second attempt on that day, you can't use you have to cease carrying that on duty. You can't deploy it on duty. You haven't displayed the proficiency, you can't use it.
Do you test with both hands or just one, just primary?
For the rifle or the pistol?
Both.
So for the pistol, they do shoot non-dominant hand.
Mm-hmm.
Are you asking like shooting with both hands?
Yeah, or like for a rifle, sometimes you're a better, like if you're going around this corner instead of this corner.
Right, you're short stocking it.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay.
So again, this is that baseline qualification standard that I want to see. We start talking even within the world I come from, which is generally regarded as a pretty high level of proficiency with rifles. You start talking about shoulder swapping and stuff like that. That's no longer a basic marksmanship task. Now we're starting to work tactics.
Okay.
And I try to avoid working tactics at the range because that's how you end up with what I call range theatrics, where there's imaginary opponents all around you and you're doing stuff that just doesn't make sense. So I deliberately did not include that. Now we do train that throughout the year, but that's not part of the qualification. So yeah, and that covers that. So it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's not our philosophy is not that it's not the tool, it's the operator, right? So all the talk about, they're getting new rifles and all that's not really, I don't really care what a deputy is carrying as long as it's serviceable and appropriate for the task. What really matters to me as a trainer, as an instructor, is that they're using strong moral judgment, restraint, and they have a high level of proficiency with whatever tool they've chosen. That is our obligation as a training, as an instructor. That's my obligation, not just to the community, but to the deputies, right? If they're ever in a situation that they're unprepared for within the realm of firearms, that's on me. And so that's the deputies, and then the community too. No one calls 911 and expects the cops to show up and go, "Oh crap, I don't really know how to deal with this," right? People call the police because they expect us to solve a problem for them, right? And so that is our obligation to the community as well. We can't fulfill that obligation if we're not giving deputies serviceable tools to accomplish the job, right? We don't have them driving around in surplus Willys Jeeps that we got for free from the federal government from Vietnam. Spoiler alert, there's a reason I used that example. And then the last thing, it's not our duty to train how it's always been. This is just a cancerous thought in law enforcement. I'm pretty new to law enforcement, so I still kind of look at it from the outside in. But I think, all of us are on the same page within the sheriff's office, at least, that is a cancerous thought in law enforcement. It's just because that's what we did before, it's safe. We didn't get sued when we did it this way, so we're going to keep doing it this way forever, or whatever the logic or rationale is behind it. If we just trained our deputies for how it's always been, we wouldn't actually need to train firearms, right? We just give them the guns and they go about their job, because we haven't had many OISs, haven't had many officer-involved shootings out here. We've never had a school shooting out here. We wouldn't need to train our deputies for a critical incident like that, right? It's never happened before. That is a cancerous thought in law enforcement that we are actively stomping out within our sphere of influence here. So, you can slide it now. So patrol rifles, I don't know, you guys, so sometimes people are like, well, why do you even have an AR-15? Why do you even have a patrol rifle? They're standard issue. They've been in common use for decades. I pulled two examples from history that kind of were catalysts for change, right? It was why law enforcement started to adopt the patrol rifle and issue out patrol rifles. So the first one was in 1966. It was the University of Texas shooting. A former Marine climbed a 70-meter or like 231 foot tower. He had about a 5 square city block fields of fire, observation fields of fire from up there. He staged a bunch of firearms around the top of that mezzanine and proceeded to shoot indiscriminately at people for about 90 minutes. Law enforcement did not take 90 minutes to get there, but he continued to fire for 90 minutes. Law enforcement, when they arrived, were armed with pistols and shotguns that were largely ineffective at that distance. So the law enforcement that responded resorted to, this is Texas in the 60s, right? So all these college boys, all these good old boys got rifles and racks in the backs of their trucks and whatnot. And so the police resorted to pulling rifles out of students' trucks in order to return effective fire, like hunting rifles and whatnot, in order to return effective fire on this guy. Ultimately, they deputized a bookstore keeper who ran up with a rifle of his own, and kind of an ad hoc group of guys went up there and finished the problem. So that happened. A bunch of other incidents happened, but really the big one in modern times or as contemporary times that people reference when they talk about law enforcement adopting patrol rifles is the North Hollywood shootout. So there's really dramatic YouTube footage, or not YouTube, helicopter footage on YouTube and whatnot, of these two guys who robbed a series of banks. They were wearing a mix of homemade and surplus bought 3A body armor, which is a threat level rating, so it's rated to stop up to 44 Magnum or 12 gauge buck. Same stuff that we wear now. They robbed this bank, cops showed up, and they got in like a 45-minute gunfight. Police fired about 700 rounds, somewhere in there. Suspects returned fire with about 1,000 or 1,100 rounds. So about 1,700 rounds flying through the air of an urban built-up area. The reason why they shot so much and why this thing was so protracted was, again, the ineffectiveness of the tools that the law enforcement had at their disposal at that time. So they shot one dude like 30 times because the majority of those rounds were stopped by his body armor because they didn't have anything that could defeat his body armor organic to their squad cars. They ended up going to a gun store and asking a gun store owner for some AR-15s and ammunition. He provided that, and then they shortly thereafter solved that problem as well. So, moral of the story is law enforcement had to turn to passersby who were better equipped to deal with the threat than they had organic to their own squad cars or their own elements. So after that, it kind of played out across the nation, right? Everyone started issuing out AR-15s or Mini 14s because they're a little less scary looking at the time during the assault weapons ban. They started issuing out variations of these rifles to law enforcement across the country. That played out here in Pacific County and I don't know what we had prior to 2013, but the furthest back that I have access to in our records that I can find is 2013. We acquired a bunch of surplus M16A1s from the federal government through a program called, well, at the time it was called Dermo, now it's called LESO. So we acquired these surplus M16A1s. They were machine guns. I don't think that no one was shooting them in automatic, right? But they were machine guns. They were modified last year to be in compliance with state law, to be semi-automatic only. So they issued it, basically it was a matter of fact. Like when I got hired, it was like, hey, here's your rifle, let's go out to the range, pass the qual, and then go commit law enforcement with this thing. So that suboptimal qualification standard and these really old guns was what we had before. Now we're trying to issue just straight semi-automatic rifles to all of our deputies who display proficiency on our rifle qualification. So that's the big change here. That's the big, and summarized in one sentence, that's what we're doing. So previously, deputies shot their rifles once a year, maybe twice a year. If they shot it more, it's because they wanted to. It's not. That's as much as they were mandated to train with them here at the SO, once or twice a year. Now they train with their pistols 4 times a year. We don't see any justification for train with one more than the other. They're both firearms. They both carry the same risk to the community every time we press a trigger. Every time we launch a bullet out into the air, it's the same risk. So we train with them now under now that I'm running this thing just as much, the rifle and pistol. What that's done though is it's highlighted some of the deficiencies in our equipment. So if you're only shooting this thing 50 times a year, 50 rounds a year, you're able to kind of just keep these things, keep them kind of limping along, and maximize the amount of time that you can use them. Well, now, our last range session, every day, every range day, I had to take 1 to 2 rifles out of service due to various mechanical breakages, and that's been the case at least since I started keeping track in the summer when I officially took over.